This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. If you are joining us on YouTube and wish to listen to this program as a podcast, you may click the link below to your favorite podcast platform. This talk is with Jane Hwang Degenhardt, Professor of English, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. We will begin by taking a look at her recent book, Globalizing Fortune on the Early Modern Stage, and also explore key themes in her past and forthcoming publications. This series is funded with support from the Aoyama Gakuin University Institute of the Humanities and also with a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Hello, Jane. Thank you for coming on our program and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, your book, we're going to get straight to your book, and this is Globalizing Fortune on the Early Modern Stage out of the Oxford University Press. And there's a lot of early modern drama here. There's Shakespeare, there's a lot of history, but we're dealing with some forms that are very profound that range from the classical philosopher Boethius and his reception in the Middle Ages. And you take us straight into the 16th century and with the idea of fortune or the goddess Fortuna and images of that goddess. And I'll let you explain more and more detail about the transformation you've identified. The feminization, because not always was Fortune a woman. And this is the kind of thing that goes straight into our time. The people who are, they're religious among us, the many who are, push back on fortune because God's will is God's will in several global religions, and fortune's sinful and all of that stuff. We'll talk about that. But may I ask you to begin by it's kind of like in the introductory chapter of your book, you explain that you outline where you're going and explain that to us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think in the broadest terms, the book is interested in sketching a kind of cultural history of fortune, sort of centered around the year 1600. And it's looking at what happens to this idea of fortune, which has a long history that precedes it. When, in short, England starts to enter the world stage and get involved in global commerce and get involved in colonial exploration and adopt new kinds of economic practices that are associated with early capitalism. And as a result of that, fortune really changes pretty radically in its meaning from, as you referenced, earlier, for example, the Boethian tradition and the Middle Ages, where fortune is associated with the Wheel of Fortune. It's depicted through that iconographical tradition. Fortuna is a goddess. She's blindfolded. She's typically ensnaring and seductive and dangerous. One of the things that makes her so is that she's arbitrary in how she spins the wheel. And so your fortunes can change very quickly and you don't have any control over that. And one of the important messages that's coming out of Boethius's philosophy is that you should really not be taken in by fortune, by the kind of temporal and material and earthly kinds of seductions that she tries to ensnare you with. And that instead, you should sort of hold out for the eternal kind of timeless rewards of heaven, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the really radical shift that happens in the early modern period is that fortune becomes instead a more inviting and even potentially ethical invitation to action and to opportunity in the world. Mm-hmm. And there comes to be a kind of possibility that you can pursue fortune and even earthly riches in ways that are ethical in ways that are ennobling. And you see that being mirrored in the shift in the iconographical tradition of fortune in the emblem books. These were emblems that were published on the continent, but then, very taken up, embraced by English emblem books, George Withers and Geoffrey Whitney. And you see depicted fortune on the sea. And it's often the seafaring image of fortune as a ship at sea. The figure of Fortuna becomes the mast of the ship. And often that figure is conflated with another tradition, that of Acacia or occasion, which represents opportunity. And that figure is distinctive for having this long forelock that sort of flows out of her forehead and then bald and back. And she passes you by. And what's being called out for is that you're to grab her and seize that lock of hair, before she passes you by. So it's this real incentive to seize opportunity. And so it's a very different message from the message that, the fortune's wheel and the Boethian tradition, right?
Yeah. It made so much sense when I began reading. I had not put all of this stuff together, but of course, in the medieval church, it would be strong. But then in the 16th century, you talk a good bit about this strong element of Calvinism that came through that arguably is even more against even the thought of there being chance, not a free will theology. And that at the same time, in parallel with what Stephen Greenblatt years ago called self-fashioning, and also being able to fashion your career, the Machiavellian advice and the advice given to young men on how to fashion their careers and how to make their own luck.
Right, that's right. I mean, that's what's so striking about how kind of prevalent and forceful and strongly animated the concept of fortune was in this period, because at the same time you had coming out of the Protestant Reformation, John Calvin, saying there is no such thing as fortune, and it's, sacrilegious to even utter the word. Much less to put any stock in that concept. Everything happens because of God's providence. There's a grand plan, and human beings aren't privy to that plan. We can't understand it. We can't see it. See what it means from our perspective here on Earth. But nonetheless, it exists, and there's some way in which fortune, I think. Although from Calvin's perspective, fortune is just out of the picture. It very much wasn't out of the picture, I think, within a more popular consciousness of the period. And I think from that perspective, there was a lot of ways in which fortune and providence kind of overlapped with one another, or there was a sense that providence was sort of that picture that you couldn't quite see, and fortune was sort of what you could see, those signs, those coincidences, those kinds of shifts in your luck and so forth. There's different names that were given to it, like luck or chance, which were sometimes synonymous with the meaning of fortune at the time. So there were ways in which fortune and providence were coexistent, and sometimes even names for kind of the same thing, or fortune and providence could kind of slip in and out of one another. Even though you weren't supposed to, from a kind of Protestant Calvinist perspective, you weren't supposed to put any stock in fortune.
Right. Well, central to your book, and we need to get this out, is how this thing found itself and was expressed on the stage, on the early modern stage. You are talking about a tradition of a scholastic tradition that goes to the Middle Ages, but we are talking about learned people, not necessarily the popular the non-elite or non-educated, which were the bulk of society. But then, of course, in the 16th century, you get more people who can read, and more ways to distribute through print technology, and all of a sudden this burst in the London theater scene. And most of your book goes into, it's what I think an extraordinarily interesting selection of dramas that not only are Shakespeare's there, but show how around this London stage to the public, how this idea of fortune is being presented and globalized in a way, right? The beginning of globalization of this concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to how I'm coming at the topic of fortune, that the theater's role in taking an interest in the concept, in representing adventures that take place in foreign places, in representing seafaring, and representing travel, and representing risky kinds of investment, all of these things. So thematically and representationally, the theater is interested in these things, but also the theater itself, I would say, identifies with fortune, with the concept of fortune, because of its own implication in London commerce, because of its own kind of evolving financial structure, which was quite radically new in Shakespeare's time, and just before Shakespeare's time, when the theater became profit driven, and investors in the theater, financiers, were not necessarily associated directly with the theater. They could be outside investors. So that kind of financial structure of the theater, and then going along with that, the theater's kind of own engagement with its audience, the risks of live performance, and the contingencies that could happen, in that context of live performance. We're all very much, connected with this concept of fortune. The ways that performances were very much dependent upon the whims of audiences. I mean, Prospero's epilogue comes to mind here when he says, gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails. That's what he's referring to. And that seafaring metaphor there coming into play. I think the theater adopted that metaphor of seafaring as a kind of a motif of fortune, for its own practices, and thought of performance and theatricality in a way as a form of seafaring, or similar to seafaring in terms of the kinds of risks that were involved in it, but also in terms of the rewards, the potential big rewards that were involved. So I can say more about that as we go on.
Yeah, this is, of course, in seafaring, which, of course, you are immediately taken to the Merchant of Venice and Hamlet. But kind of surprising to me, you start with Faustus and Friar Bacon, Friar Bungay, Robert Greene's much to our disappointment overlooked play.
Yes.
And I was interested in why you went there first. I know why now, but that was first, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I had in mind too. I wanted to start off with two plays that people would say, huh, why, what does that have to do with fortune and commerce? And but I actually think when you look at these plays closely, or not even that closely, you start to see the preponderance of references that run throughout both plays to commerce, and to empire, and to the difference between commercial empire and empires that are kind of earned through, or won through, conquest of land, conquest of territory, mm-hmm. right? I think mm-hmm. both plays are actually interested in that distinction. And running, I mean, of course, Dr. Faustus is a play that's quite interested in exposing the dangers of overreaching, imperial overreaching, and different forms of human, ambition that gets out of control. sometimes that can be manifested in the form of greed for control over commerce, or desire for exotic commodities that Faustus, wants to lay claim to. And, a lot of his language and the motivation for why he wants this power that magic gives to him is, actually this lust for these exotic commodities and access to these, far reaches of the earth, far corners of the earth, which he imagines himself conquering and then laying claim to all of their riches. So, I think it's interesting because these plays have been spoken about before together by scholars, but usually not, to my knowledge, because they're talking about interest in commerce, or even interest in empire. Translatio imperii is a kind of historiographical concept that I think both plays are also interested in taking up. But rather, scholars have approached these plays together because they feature magicians and they're sort of, written contemporary to one another. And I think that sort of becomes the way that we, get used to thinking about these plays, right? And if these plays are about humanistic enterprise, it has to do with knowledge. And, in Fire Bacon and Fire Bungay, like the building of this, the construction of this brass wall, or the oracular head, that appears. And so I think that sometimes the emphasis on those things that we get used to, associating these plays with, maybe obscures, some of the other interests that these plays have. And that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of call to my readers' attention.
I want to go to your play selection and return to that, because there were other surprises in there for me, and a couple of things that I had to go quickly and try to get acquainted with, or hadn't read in some years. But this whole idea of this strong Calvinism, this Reformation theology, the space for that, it's almost ecclesiastical. There's a time for that. It's called going to church Sunday, whenever you go to church. That's when you're told you're in God's hands. But then there's a time for fortune and chance, and that's in the playhouse. You had to be very careful as a dramatist how you displayed religion is done, and you've written on this. But the thing is, that is what makes it a play exciting. The idea of chance, sometimes dumb luck, fortune, and the visuals that all come with that is just a fabulous idea. And I want to go to the well, of course, Merchant of Venice, but the Four Prentices of London. And Fair Maid was one of my favorites off Shakespeare. Hay was so prolific, but you don't get to see that. I did see a performance, an excellent performance years ago. And it's a great play to play with, because you're outside of Shakespeare. You can do a lot of stuff. And just Fair Maid. And I'm looking through your table of contents. Hamlet, of course, but Riding Out the Storm, Pericles, yes, but other things in here, including John Dee. Not necessarily all dramatists. So I'm very interested how you arranged this smorgasbord of dramas, because I'm sure you had to make decisions on those that you had to exclude for various reasons, and then these that you. Obviously, what you want to do is say, this is not just a Shakespearean thing. This is public consciousness in transition.
Yeah, absolutely. It was not easy to to kind of whittle things down to the final choices. And in the end, I decided to pair two plays in each chapter that sort of speak to one another. And you're absolutely right that it was important to me that the plays not just be Shakespeare, and that I really foreground more plays that were not written by Shakespeare. In fact, that's how I've always tended to kind of approach the early modern theater. I think there's so many fantastic plays out there that aren't read as much or aren't considered as good or whatever it is, and yet they are, and they really deserve to be studied and thought about and read, and they're fantastic plays, often exciting and fun and interesting dramaturgically, et cetera, like The Four Apprentices of London and like Fair Maid of the West and Decker's Old Fortunatus, which is another one I talk about. They sometimes get overlooked or get short shrift because of the dominance of Shakespeare. And I love Shakespeare as much as the next person. So not, but I think there's also part of me that's resists a kind of Shakespeare's, Shakespeare exceptionalism and so forth. Heywood, I think, is a fantastic playwright, and he was very prolific in writing plays about adventure. So I could have chosen, any number of plays written by Heywood. The sort of adventure genre that was popular on the stage around kind of in the 10 years preceding and then following 1600, the turn of the 17th century. I think adventure plays really had their heyday. So plays like Fortune by Land and Sea and The Fair Maid of the West and a number of others. And yeah, it wasn't easy to make the cuts. The book could have been much longer. And all of these plays are interesting and doing very different things, in fact.
There's, of course, a current here. Not all things turned out well for others. As much as we love the images of swashbuckling and chance and this sort of thing, a sword fight. You see it in Romeo and Juliet. It just seems to be just dumb luck that one guy, that Tybalt died and Romeo didn't. That kind of thing. We go on and on and on with examples, but this seafaring and this moving out and going into the world, of course, predates by not very much colonization and those things that happened worldwide, and it's beginning pretty much in this period.
That's right. Yeah, these plays are imaginative. They're imagining other worlds. They're imagining encounters. And I think that's what's really interesting about them is they're fictions, and they're speculative in certain ways, and they really kind of unleash the imagination, of the playwrights and the audiences as well, in terms of sometimes the extraordinary kinds of things that the stories that they tell. So, I mean, you mentioned Four Apprentices of London, which is the story of these four brothers who are noble, but their fortunes have turned, sort of downward, and they've been reduced to being London apprentices. And at some point early on, because they're relatively unhappy in their trades, although they take some pride in them, they decide to enlist. There's a call to enlist in the army and join the Crusades against the Muslims in Jerusalem. And so, the most of the play is about these extraordinary travels that they undertake, in which they cross paths multiple times and have numerous adventures and, individually, encounter their sister who they don't recognize. So they all kind of fall in love with her without realizing she's their sister, and they don't recognize one another either. So the play is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's outlandish. All of these things are true of it. And yet, and I think that's what's interesting about it, is that evidence suggests that didn't stop it from actually being quite wondrous, and from audiences really enjoying it, and not just kind of enjoying it because they're snickering, but actually, kind of in a way allowing themselves to be taken in. And the play really sort of explores the limits of what can be possible on the stage, and how far they can go in terms of challenging the audience's imagination, and of course, representing long distance travel, oceanic travel, shipwreck, dangers of seafaring. All of that is not something that the stage does naturally or easily.
No.
So, it sort of raises the question, well, why were so many playwrights interested in doing just that, when it was something that their medium actually didn't lend itself to, certainly not very realistically. And I think it was actually that challenge and the kind of what happens when you sort of expose the difficulties there and the kinds of disjunctures from realism that is part of what was entertaining about these plays, and part of what was interesting about their dramaturgy from our perspective now, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it does. I'm thinking as you're speaking, the prologue to Henry V, you're gonna have to bring it. If we can't do it, we can't bring princes armies onto the stage. You got to meet us halfway here with your imagination. And I've seen years ago a production of The Tempest that should have been good. The director, the actors, everybody, and they tried to bring this image of the ship onto the stage at the beginning with the shipwreck, and it was it was absurd. So I don't know how they did it, but it's a real challenge, isn't it, for a director to get armies and ships and so forth into the minds of the audience.
Right. Well, I think that that's the thing. I don't think that they were interested in they didn't try to provide a realistic representation of these things.
Yeah.
And, perhaps in modern productions, when they do try to do it on a stage, it doesn't work, as you're suggesting as well, necessarily. But I've seen productions, recent productions of Pericles, for example, which is another play that is a play that very much, is staging travel. And that play, the production that I'm thinking of didn't try to do that. And I've seen other productions that don't try to do that. And nevertheless, it's a beautiful play to watch, and it's very emotional, kind of emotionally driven play in some ways, and there's a way that you kind of give over to it, despite the fact that there's nothing realistic about its kind of representational practices or what it's trying to do representationally.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want your readers to be able to enjoy this. I want to move ahead and then move backwards and not go through linear time exactly. But I'm interested in one of your key words here for a forthcoming project, because it just doesn't stop. The work keeps going. And you're co-authoring with Henry Turner a book that's entitled The Shakespearean Horizon, Worlds Upon Worlds in the Renaissance and Today. So what might we expect? And this word that you use, the worlding of things, the worlding, if you could explain to us how that concept works in your research and writing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because my work, the book that we've just been talking about, Globalizing Fortune, really is about the idea of a global world, and the idea of what happens when England starts to become more aware of a kind of global world, and starts to want to get involved in that global world in a new way, and my first book, was also, which is Islamic conversion and Christian resistance on the early modern stage, right?
Yeah, I want to get back to that after the worlding part.
Okay, yeah, I won't say much about it, but just to make the point that book was also kind of taken up with early globalization, something that you could call early globalization, right? But when you ask about worlding and this new project, we were really attracted to the concept of world and worlding, because I would say because it's more it has a kind of speculative kind of connotation that is possible with that concept. It doesn't like kind of mean anything exactly in itself. I mean, it's very open on this concept of world in a way, and it's one that, I mean, what we're trying to do, I think, ultimately, in using Shakespeare as a kind of source, a resource for us, but a starting place, to look for models of world that are a kind of alternative to globe, that are alternative to the course that world has. I mean, you could say that globe is one specific kind of iteration of world. It's one specific kind of understanding of world, as a kind of objectified, mappable, kind of geopolitical kind of entity, right? And I think there's so many other, we're interested in the fact that there's just so many other possibilities in terms of how world can be understood and how that term is used. And it's one that's used all over Shakespeare, all over Shakespeare's plays, all over the early modern stage period, right? I mean, hundreds and hundreds of times. Whereas it's striking when we looked up the word globe in Shakespeare's plays, and it really only appears, I think, 3 times. So, even though as scholars, we've made a big deal about the global in early modern literature and in the 16th and 17th centuries, I think world was actually, like, in a lot of ways, a bigger, more important concept at the time. And certainly one of the premises that we have for the book is that world is not singular. We're interested in worlds. So we're interested in a pluralistic approach to worlds in the period. And again, that's countering other approaches that would focus more specifically on the mapping of the globe and kind of the early modern development of this like single holistic world that is objectified. Instead, we're interested in entertaining the idea of multiple worlds in the period, and really even the idea of a multiverse. And so along with that, another kind of premise of the book, or another concept that's important to us, is that of cosmology, how that concept helps us to approach the concept of world in terms of governing principles, which might include aesthetic principles and ethical principles. And so along those lines, I've recently been doing some research into kind of the cosmological understandings of world that were specific to Stoicism and Buddhism, to consider different kinds of worldly cosmologies that run counter to the more imperialistic model that we tend to associate with European humanism, with the character of Prospero, for example, right? What we're so familiar kind of with that, we associate that with the period, I think, and there's good reasons why I mean, it makes sense, because that's the world we've inherited, this global world, this imperial world, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't other worlds that have always been, always been with us and can always be possible in the future. So that's part of what we're interested in capturing. So another thing, and I think this is maybe ties back to what we were talking about with Shakespeare, in terms of, yes, I love Shakespeare, but at the same time, I don't think that, Shakespeare should be studied to the exclusion of, other writers, right? So, what we're interested in with this book is also doing kind of some transhistorical intertextual work. I mean, again, I don't know how much of this will wind up in the actual book that we publish, but in terms of our creative process, I've been really inspired by contemporary works of fiction, especially by ethnic American writers who are interested in speculative worlds, and the uses of fiction to imagine new worlds. So writers like Ruth Ozeki, who wrote a book called A Tale for the Time Being, that I found very interesting to think about in relation to Antony and Cleopatra, for example.
And I can't help but bring this in here. What you're talking about reminds me so much years ago of meeting your former colleague, he's passed now, Arthur Kinney. And
Yeah.
The fortunate that our fortune in having been able to work with this gentleman. He was so bright, so productive, so wonderful, magnanimous in terms of. I'll just have to say I would not be sitting here with this career that finally worked out without Arthur. It would never have
Yeah.
happened. It never would have. And he was just that way. It seems to be there in the spirit of UMass Amherst, that because Arthur would stop and write a book on Faulkner. He didn't see limitations, and he
That's
would
right.
go straight out into any area he saw. I think he did some work on Toni Morrison at one point. I know that he greatly appreciated her writing. But I did want to mention in memoriam Arthur Kinney, and do I wish I could have a talk with him now.
Yeah,
You just wish
absolutely.
people could live forever, but we can't.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely a big, expansive thinker. But what you're saying also puts me in mind of the concept of small world, in the sense that a lot of roads lead back to Arthur, I suppose, that and we're intersecting in a way because of the world that he built, or helped to build, through his own scholarship and his own kind of generosity and desire to kind of reach out as far and wide as he could. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to backtrack just a little bit and move from Arthur to you. And I would like to put this in kind of now before we get too far into it, and before we get to conversion, which will be next. But you have a preface if we go back to the Globalizing, your most recent book, where you talk about your background and the idea, the element of chance. And if you could share
Yeah.
a bit of that with us here. I loved it, by the way. What a great way to begin a book about fortune and chance and what can happen in a life.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that's the case. It was actually quite a risky undertaking for me to write such a personal preface. It's not something I've done before. I haven't actually published any personal writing in the past. So, and to make it part of a scholarly book was also a kind of risky undertaking for me, I would say. So I'm always happy to hear when people felt that it spoke to them or added some value to the book. But I felt it was really an honest way of accounting for my interest and my personal connection to the topic of fortune. Just to give a little background about my early life, I was an orphan. I was adopted at an early age from South Korea by a family in New York, an American family, and very little, almost nothing is known about my early life until I was adopted around the age of 5 or 6 months. In fact, my birthday is actually a mystery. There's no record of my birth, and there's no record of my name from birth. So one of the things that's always kind of fascinated me and preoccupied me is, just this question of like, how is it that I kind of became who I am, like in this instant, just by chance of being adopted by this family. Now, given a new name, being named Jane, being given an identity, a nationality, a new language, a new religion, like all of these things, a whole new life, in a sense, like it opened up a whole different kind of future from that moment, than I probably would have had I been adopted by someone else, or had I not been adopted and stayed in South Korea, or, whatever the case might be. So that kind of confrontation with like how in an instant, your life can change so radically. And what is the reason for that? How do we explain that to ourselves? and has always kind of preoccupied me. I think it's always been like a powerful thing. And just to sort of understand, so we use the word fortune, to describe that, or luck or chance, right? But what do those words actually mean? Why do we name something that we actually can't know, a mystery? Why do we choose the name fortune to name that mystery? And that's interesting to me too. It's this kind of what kind of narrative are we imposing onto these mysteries, kind of these things that are totally unknowable, my past history, which is unrecoverable, my roots, right? I'll never be able to recover it, and there's something painful about that. But there's also something, maybe I tried to have a kind of more positive, a sort of twist to it, by saying that kind of confronting what's unknowable, and sort of being with it, in a way, is in some ways also liberating, in some ways kind of generates a kind of potentiality, just so it doesn't necessarily just have to be a kind of dead end, or a source of like, well, that's, I'll never know that, what can be, how can there be a more positive kind of resource in what is unknowable, is part of what animated my interest in the topic of fortune also.
Yeah, I think somewhere in your educational background too, when you saw the Shakespearean drama, of course, probably first and foremost, and then moved out into the other dramas in this period, that is transitional in the English speaking world, and in the consciousness. We still are living things that were set at that time, for better or for worse, religiously and commercially, that in our lives, that there had to be, maybe in a deep structural way, a kind of, okay, this, I'm sort of at home with this. These public plays, this period of people in transition and not quite knowing where they're going, maybe in many cases not knowing exactly where they came from, upward mobility happening just by chance, and so it seems to fit the Shakespearean interest in early modern drama also.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, there's that, you're putting me in mind of a quote from Twelfth Night, when Sebastian says, yet doth that accident of flood and fortune so far exceed all instance, all discourse, that I'm ready to distrust mine eyes. And I think there he's, really referring to how, fortune, like, these things that can happen and that we experience, can just sort of blow apart, all our framework for explaining anything, the typical way that, we would tend to, we have no recourse, I guess, to those tools and those narratives that we would use to explain things. Sometimes fortune can do that to us. And I think, what's important, or what's helpful maybe to recognize in those moments, is that it's returning us to a kind of humbler position in the world.
Yes.
Where we're not in control. Maybe the way to approach that position is to be curious, and to be alert, and to kind of embrace that humility, of not knowing, how has this happened, what does it mean, what's going to happen next, right? Those questions and I think lots of people in the world at different times in their life have had an experience, that has kind of made them feel this way, where something just hits them out of nowhere, and wow, it just really, turns your world upside down.
Yeah, it does, because I know with you, and I know with me, it seemed like everyone along the way was saying, "Are you really sure you want to go in that direction?" There are so many. You do your homework. You're pretty smart. You probably could get a better paying job than this, or get a better job than that, or whatever. But there was just something that kind of drives us in this direction. And I think this is a kind of segue into conversion, because we're talking about conversional thinking, how I was talking with Steve Wittick a couple of months ago, and we were discussing the notion of conversion coming to you, whacking you like a Pauline conversion, or you trying to go to it, wanting to be converted, looking for a sign. But in this world of chance, you see, even though we think of the religious world as anti-chance, all God's will, there's conversion. And there's a lot of chance in that. And you talk about Islamic in your prior book, Islamic conversion in this drama. And I wanted to ask you, I think you were part of the same project at McGill.
That's right.
At the conversion project with Paul Yachnin.
Yachnin,
that's right. What a wonderful thing. And I was there and at a conference hosted by Torrance Kirby, whom you may have met too. What a fabulous project, and what a great idea to have a beginning and an end. Because sometimes we begin things and you go, "Oh, what are we going to do now?" So let's kind of weave this together a little bit. Islamic conversion, the idea of conversion, because it is a subject that our listeners are very interested in.
Yeah. So I know Steve Wittick through the Conversions Project that you were mentioning, and Paul Yachnin, was another figure in our field who was just a world builder, wonderful at bringing scholars together from all over the place and to talk about conversion. And this happened over multiple years. This project played out. So I think, one of the things it shows us is that conversion was just such a central preoccupation for the period. And there's so many ways in which that concept was meaningful in the early modern period. Religious conversion was one thing, but then there were all kinds of other kinds of conversions that people were thinking about. And so like fortune, it's a really major concept for the period. And in my book, what I was interested in were these English plays that seemed to be taken up with the fascination of conversion to Islam as a kind of sexual seduction, as one that was, quite literally was sort of manifested through sexual intercourse, right? So it was not only imagined as a kind of religious conversion or a spiritual conversion, but also a kind of bodily conversion, one that maybe had reproductive consequences. So, I really think that conversion in that context, takes on significance in terms of the history of race and the history of the intersection between religion and race. So that's one of the things I was interested in getting at. Also interested in the way that gender comes into play and sexuality come into play. So much in the constructions of and again, these are imagined constructions that the theater, that the playwrights are producing of how Christians become converted to Islam, right? It wasn't, it had no basis in fact, and the plays didn't even pretend that they had a basis in fact, but it's this imaginative capacity and the power of the imagination that I think is so interesting about the plays, and how these imaginative dramas are, have so much to tell us about, in fact, the history of race and religion in early modern England, and histories that we've inherited, in some ways are still with us today, in terms of some of the ways in which we sexualize Eastern or Muslim figures, and demonize these figures, and so forth. So it's like some of this we've inherited, and the history that is kind of rooted in the imaginations of these early plays.
Yeah. It is, and it reveals through the study of these, and it just that might be a little bit too serious-minded. Just reconsidering them, seeing a production, it reveals stuff. You just begin to see things about your own existence and the world in which we live, whether they are the same or different, or there's an interaction there that is, and it's in my experience, seems enlightening, and I'd like to think so. And now you take these ideas into your teaching, and you do work on gender and women's studies, I believe, and across the board there, and you weave that into some things that are now kind of more current issues that we're confronting now. So let's talk a little bit about that. How you present this stuff in your teaching.
Well, I mean, for me, of course, going back to my early history, it's just a matter of chance that I, became a Shakespearean, I suppose, right? But what drew me to Shakespeare's plays, and so this is something that, I think informs my teaching quite directly, was an interest in, and not just Shakespeare's plays, but all of the plays of the Renaissance period, of the English Renaissance, is in some ways how foreign they are, and how much there is to be discovered in them.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting dichotomy between there's something familiar, of course. There's something, I mean, I don't want to use the word universal, but, something that we think, there are many moments in the plays where we think, okay, I'm right there with that moment. I know what this means. I felt this, or, this is very relatable to me. But at the same time, there's so much in these plays that is completely foreign. The words, many of the metaphors, many of the themes and ideas, some of the more subtle themes, I think are quite, there's just so much to be discovered, invitations for discovery and for creativity. So that's how I kind of like to approach the plays in my teaching, I think. And I definitely feel that increasingly my teaching has moved more in the direction of interest in social justice and interest in well, just asking the question about what is social justice, what can literature contribute to it, in what ways is literature a form of social justice. Shakespeare being the most canonical author, that we tend to teach, and certainly very influential all over the world, not always for reasons that we're proud of. Colonialism and so forth has obviously helped spread Shakespeare's plays around the world and made him so influential. But at the same time, I think it behooves us, because of the wide reach of Shakespeare, to think about, well, what is Shakespeare? What are the teaching of his plays, the adaptation of his plays, and so the production of his plays around the world? Like, how can that serve us in terms of social justice, in terms of some of the challenges that we face in our current world today? And so I like to, in my teaching, encourage students, and they want to be thinking about these things too. So it's not a stretch for them. It's not something that I'm, banging them over the head with, at least not with my students at UMass. They're very eager to think about, like, well, we're reading The Tempest, how does that relate to the world we live in now? Like, how has this play been used, and how can it be used to address questions relating to social justice in our world today? And in a class that I recently taught, we did a whole unit on the teaching of Shakespeare in prison, and The Tempest in particular, as a play that's been performed in prison. And, just thinking about the resonances that become possible, when we put Shakespeare into these new kinds of contexts in the world. When we sort of take them out of not that I think there's value to historicism, and that's fascinating too. So I wouldn't want to discount that, but I think there's also value in moving Shakespeare into new kinds of contexts and seeing, what good can be done there.
Well, I'm working now on Shakespearean adaptation with a couple of Japanese colleagues, and we've done some work, and I've done some very recent work. But it's very clear that now there's one string of reception of Shakespeare in the history from the Meiji period, from the late 19th century, where there were here and there at points what are called the garter and hose productions, where you try to make it as authentic, whatever that means. But basically, the strongest strain of Shakespearean adaptation in Japan has been from left theater that was oppositional and did not feel a great obligation to give you the Victorian, the 18th century bard or the icon. They felt very free from the very beginning, and it goes all the way through, and it picks up after World War II in underground theaters and what we'd call avant-garde theater, influence here and there. So what I gather is, okay, we have Shakespeare, the bust or whatever, but when you get theater people involved with this, they get into the material and they see something they like, and particularly in left, left-driven theater. So it's not always imperial. And it seems that Shakespeare does, and I bet we could find many examples, maybe in Indian theater and so forth, where Shakespeare is there. Here you have a lot of free raw material that you can do with what you want.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
There have to be some happy social justice stories out there, and not just the big bad West doing what it has done.
Right. That's true too. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about Pericles, which is a play that I've spoken of, I think, already, and it's one that I talk about in the Globalizing Fortune book. But that's a play that's been taken up, recently in ways to kind of address the migrant, the refugee kind of experience in the Mediterranean, right? And I think that's, so important to address, but also fascinating the way that play can do that. And the Red Bull Theater in New York, they did a recent kind of series on that play where they had BIPOC theater practitioners and artists, talking about their relationship to that play. And they had a staged reading of it by Kent Gash, which really sort of was done in the vein of kind of aspiring to a resonance with the transatlantic slave trade and the journey, sort of kind of moving it into a whole different context, in fact. But it actually worked. Some of the themes in the play that have to do with separation from family, and the kind of unrootedness and longing that can create, and then the way that really informs the emotional impact of the family reunion at the end of the play, right?
Yes.
I mean, some would say that an adaptation like that is or even a stage reading that is trying to draw out some of those resonances for a whole different kind of history is really changing the play in ways that it wasn't meant to be, that was not intended by Shakespeare. But I don't think that really matters. I think Shakespeare would be very happy to see this happening.
This intentionality thing, it's hard, because you and I now have been in this for years, and you probably have had it, every time you teach a play, again, you start seeing something, and there are these scary moments where you go, I've never seen this. It was here in front of me the whole time. And maybe this play is trying to do something entirely different than what I originally thought, So trying to gauge intentionality in Shakespeare is a very slippery slope, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't even, it's not, and it's not really interesting either. So
It's
I
not. No, yeah.
steer
Uh,
my students
it's
away
made
from
that
that.
way. It's made to be flexible. I'm sure there were adaptations in Shakespeare's own time. And they didn't play Hamlet the same way every time. And there's all the evidence of, cutting plays for this venue and doing more this over here, whatever. You're free to do that stuff, and people should remain free to do it. Uh, Although there is a strong historic, all of the bad stuff, coming mainly from out of the 18th century, out of a kind of colonial consciousness and the high Victorian idea of, or maybe it might be more the late 19th, early 20th century educational community where they adopted these values that led to what did Bill Carroll talked about? Royalist readings of
Mhm.
Shakespeare's that still have that force out there, but it's not nearly as strong now. And the
Yeah.
material
Well,
the material itself will lead you. If you're dealing with the social justice issue, it will lead you there.
yeah. Well, I think the field is changing, in good ways. It's evolving, and hopefully it will continue to do so. It's in terms of the breadth of well, the scholars who are laying claim to Shakespeare, and the diverse breadth of ways in which Shakespeare can lend itself to different conversations and directions of scholarship and teaching and service in the world. So
Yeah. Well, this has just been wonderful, Jane. I would like to ask you to stay for a moment and debrief, but I think we've covered it. Well, we could go on and on. I mean, you're talking about worlds, in multiverses. This could go, but
right.
I think that our just as my students, as people in the Shakespeare Society of Japan, we have an international audience coming in from various and sundry, not a huge audience, but a very diverse and interested group. And I'm sure I'm speaking on their behalf when I say thank you very much. It's just so good of you to take your time here. I'm here early on a Friday morning, and you're Thursday night in Massachusetts, and I'm keeping you away from your dinner, but.
Oh no, well, thank you for getting up so early for me, and it's been
It's
my
my
pleasure.
pleasure. It's my pleasure. It's our pleasure.
Yeah,
And
mine too.
and please do stay. But thank you so much for contributing to our little series here.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.